Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Well, not many people can list Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, Jennifer Lopez and Nicolas Cage amongst its clients, but my next guest certainly can. Paul Tweed from WP Tweed Co has earned a reputation as the defamation lawyer to the stars, and he's now voicing his concern about AI chatbots and how they can infringe defamation law. Paul joins us now to discuss this new development and what it might mean for the Irish courts. Paul, you've represented many high-profile names in court, so you really have enjoyed a distinguished career in law.
Morning, Karl. Well, I think I'm probably getting a bit past it now, Karl. I've been doing it that long. I mean, I've been certainly doing media law from back in the mid-1980s, whenever it was quite a well-known case I was involved in, where two of the leading senior counsel of their day were accused of fighting over the last chocolate eclair in a Hollywood cake shop. That's Hollywood County Down, by the way, as opposed to California. And that set me off on a career towards perhaps more high-profile cases than the more traditional slippers and trippers that the firm had been engaged on up until that time. But it's an interesting aspect of the legal profession in that it probably attracts more publicity and therefore gives the lawyer more profile than would be the case, say, for a corporate lawyer. So from that point of view, you don't really have to spend too much on advertising, provided you keep winning cases and you get the right media coverage.
And Paul, are there any of the high-profile cases that stand out as being particularly memorable for you?
I have to go right back to the early 90s, Karl, to the Eastwood v McGuigan case. That was one that we got a record damage award after 5.5 weeks in a full-blooded, probably one of the most vicious legal battles I've ever been involved in at the time. Barney Eastwood was very well known, boxing promoter and businessman, and his protege, who became the world featherweight champion, Barry McGuigan, both fell out. Barry had alleged that he'd been put in the ring in Las Vegas to defend his title when he was injured, and we acted for, we better say, Mr. Eastwood. You remember the Thank You, Mr. Eastwood song? That got a lot of notoriety. Obviously, we could not let that rest, and we took defamation proceedings against McGuigan. And the net result was, after bringing witnesses in from all over the world, we had the trainers, managers, referees, judges. We brought them from Vegas, Denver, Los Angeles, New York, London, all around the world. They came in and they all gave evidence. And it was a real roller coaster of a case because, unknown to me at the time, most people apparently thought that neither Barney as my client or me as a lawyer had a chance of winning it. But in the end, we proved them all wrong when a 7-person jury came back with an award of £450,000, which was a record then and is still, regarded as a very significant amount.
And Paul, how do the legal principles differ depending on the jurisdiction?
Well, very much so. I mean, London changed their law back in 2013 and effectively dispensed with the right to a jury trial. It's possible still in theory there. They brought in the serious harm hurdle. They brought in various factors to combat libel tourism, which don't get me started in that, Karl, because we'll overrun your programme time. I mean, I'm still waiting for somebody to give me an example of a libel tourist. But anyway, they brought in various pieces of legislation to deal with that. Belfast followed suit in the summertime there, although what they did was they, in their wisdom, the Assembly took pieces of the 2013 Act in London and sort of put it together, and it's now just a total hybrid of nothing. And then Dublin have spent quite a considerable amount of time debating the issues. It looks like they're going to dispense with juries, and they are going to introduce various hurdles and various forum restrictions. But again, I just think it's unnecessary. It's going to make it very expensive. It's going to put out the lights of the print media because the costs are now going to go through the roof, and the costs tend to be much more consideration than damages. I mean, if you look at the Wagatha Christie case, whereas a case, albeit it was one that the defendant won, but, the costs were estimated at between £2 and £3 million. Likewise, if you look at Johnny Depp's case, where it was, significant award, but the costs are a much bigger factor in all these cases than the actual financial damages award. And that's very important. And I would urge the legislators in Dublin, before it's too late, to bear that in mind.
And Paul, of course, the Irish media have been very critical of the current defamation legislation that's in place here. In your opinion, is their criticism merited?
I mean, I can understand where they're coming from. There have been some outrageous awards, far too high. And I have no problem with a cap being put on jury awards. But I would just say this one thing. There's an obsession with getting rid of the juries. And I've been dealing with juries. I'm old enough to remember when we had them in personal injury cases as well. And in my experience, whether it's 12 individuals in Dublin or 7 in Belfast, the minds of all the individuals put together tend to come to the right outcome. But the media take the view that the damages, it's going to be ultimately a much higher damage award than if it was a judge sitting alone. Well, in the Arlene Foster case, the former First Minister, the case we brought against the Harley Street doctor, Christian Jessen, it was a judge sitting alone, and he awarded £125,000 for the tweet. Now, that was the figure that both myself and a number of my colleagues had put down a bit of paper beforehand, and we were doing on the basis of what a jury would have awarded. So it doesn't, in my view, make any difference really whether it's a judge alone, providing it's an experienced judge who understands media law and media cases, or whether it's a jury. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but the media are focused on this so much because they think it's going to make a dramatic difference. Now, it will stop the outrageous damage awards. I mean, Dublin have had more than their fair share of those, and they cannot be justified. And unfortunately, that undermines the basic principles of the law, which I believe, as things currently stand, nonetheless still remains sound and fair.
And Paul, what is your approach to presenting a defamation case to the court?
First of all, I've got to be satisfied there's merit in the case. I mean, we act for individuals, we act for companies, we act for publishers, we act for newspapers, we act right across the board for wealthy people, for not so wealthy people, for the man on the street or whatever. And so, but I have the same criteria. I've got to be satisfied that I've been told the truth, that I am satisfied that there is merit from a legal perspective under defamation law or privacy law or data law, depending on what angle we're having to take. And once I'm satisfied in that, I then work out what the risks are in the case. I then try to minimise those risks. I then do my utmost to get a case settled without having to issue proceedings. And I engage with the in-house lawyers or the editor or the journalist, depending on the appropriate on who is appropriate for any particular situation. Because I would know most of the in-house lawyers, and I get on very well with them. I hope they would say the same about me. Maybe they're rolling their eyes at the moment if they're listening. But I mean, they know as much and much more about media law than I do. And we normally can, if there's merit, they will say it and we can thrash it out. And so like 95, maybe 98% of my cases are settled or resolved before they go into court.
And of course, we've seen a very interesting case recently with Donald Trump, where the jury found that he had sexually abused and defamed E. Jean Carroll, and damages being awarded. Will we now be seeing libel tourism moving back across the Atlantic as a result of this one?
It's looking like it. I'm sort of doing a wee bit of a search to see about offices in New York or LA, Karl. I think, a branch office out there would be very timely. But I think there's most definitely there's been a major trend, between the Dominion case against Fox, obviously the Johnny Depp second round of his battle with Amber Heard, and there are numerous other cases. And it's not all one-way traffic out there, because Elon Musk, he actually successfully defended the case brought by the UK cave diver. And so, I think the American courts certainly make it much more exciting and interesting, not just for the plaintiffs, but also for the lawyers. And in the United States, what they allow contingency cases. So in other words, the plaintiff does not have to pay anything. The attorney will cover the costs of all the outlay, all the investigations, carry his own costs right through to the end of the case, and then the attorney takes a percentage, sometimes 30 to 35% of the damages awarded in return for taking the risk and funding the case. That's not allowed here in Ireland. And I've always been an advocate of that. I think it levels everyone. It makes everyone think, because the attorney will not be taking on a case, if he thinks he's going to be landed with having to finance it and he's going to lose it. So I think, you do tend to get a much more even number, a more appropriate number of cases actually reaching trial. And also in the United States, costs normally do not follow the event. Whereas in Ireland, if you're successful, costs normally, not necessarily automatically, but will normally be awarded to the winning party.
And of course, the Fox News case was a very interesting one as well, in that they settled the defamation case for $787.5 million for misinformation and conspiracy theories. They've proved to be a very expensive price tag. Is there a new era of accountability coming on both sides of the Atlantic?
I think there's most definitely, and I think you've summarised that very well. I mean, this is the new era of accountability. I'd made that point after the Arlene Foster case and the case we did for Stephen Nolan, the BBC presenter, that I think these big awards, these big settlements are a sign that accountability is at last here on the horizon, whether it's for people on social media who think that they can, libel with impunity, whether it's the US media who think that they've got a right to libel with First Amendment protection no matter what they do. So I think definitely this will make people think twice, but it should not, and I do not think it will, impact on freedom of speech. I mean, I think freedom of speech is critical. It's a vital importance, just as investigative journalism is, but it's got to be fair and accurate.
And in terms of the social media platforms themselves, should they become more accountable as part of this?
Most certainly. I just laugh when I still hear. I mean, they're still trying to argue that they are a platform as opposed to a publisher. Now, nobody's been able to tell me the difference between the liability of a Sunday newspaper for a reader's letter that they publish to a social media company facilitating and publishing a tweet or a posting on their platform. It's absurd. We have a number of test cases that are coming up on the horizon, and I'm hoping that the courts will finally take a view that they are publishers. And it's as simple as that. We don't need complex legislation to deal with it, but also the on that point, the legislators, the people who are drafting the new defamation legislation is coming out in Dublin. I mean, they should have one priority and one priority only: to ensure that the social media and search engine giants are treated on the same basis as the traditional media. But if they don't do that, the traditional media, certainly the print media, are finished.
And Paul, the newest emerging trend in this area, of course, is relating to artificial intelligence chatbots like ChatGPT. What complications are they creating for your clients?
Well, we've had a number of inquiries, and we've had a number of people contacting us extremely concerned about the whole situation. You'll probably have read about the various examples where, there's a leading professor in Washington put in a request into one of the AI chatbots, and it got back this absolutely false, highly defamatory information, which had considerable difficulty getting changed. We have had people coming into us who have either put in requests for information about themselves, friends, colleagues, or whatever, and they're getting highly defamatory material back, quoting newspaper articles that simply do not exist, and then having incredible difficulty persuading the AI intelligence robot or whatever it is, the other end, to actually realise that this is totally false.
With so many of the US tech companies having the European base and headquarters here in Ireland, is there a chance that Ireland is going to become a hub for these types of cases going forward?
Well, I think they should be. I mean, most of these companies have decided, for reasons of tax tourism or otherwise, to set up base in Ireland, and they're very welcome. And they're a very welcome addition to the economy, and nobody for one moment would question that. But at the end of the day, they still have to submit to the same laws as every other major employer in Ireland and elsewhere in Europe. And having set up their European, Middle Eastern and African headquarters in Dublin for that purpose, I can't understand, if that's what it says on the pack, why that doesn't mean that they are accountable for any data breaches, privacy breaches, defamatory content that they, on their platforms, in any of those geographical jurisdictions, pump out, that they cannot, that they're not accountable in Dublin. I mean, I'm taking the view that they are, but that's going to be that has been and will be an ongoing fight for us.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was defamation lawyer Paul Tweed, and I'd like to thank Paul for providing us with a fascinating overview of media law and the emerging issues which need to be addressed.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast.